Power has always demanded obedience, but fear has often been the fastest way to enforce it. Across history, kings did not rule by laws alone, they ruled by example. And sometimes that example was brutal enough to echo across generations. When monarchs felt threatened, betrayed, or challenged, punishment was rarely simple or merciful. It was calculated, symbolic, and designed to send a message that disobedience would not just fail, but be remembered. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were political weapons, sharpened to preserve power at any cost. In ancient and medieval societies, kings were more than rulers. They were living symbols of divine authority. To defy a king was to defy the order of the universe itself. That belief justified punishments that today seem unimaginable, yet at the time were seen as necessary acts of control. Kings understood something fundamental about human psychology. Fear spreads faster than loyalty. A single harsh punishment could deter rebellion more effectively than 1,000 speeches. One of the most common and feared punishments in ancient kingdoms was public execution, not merely to remove enemies, but to turn death into spectacle. In Assyria, one of history's most ruthless empires, kings deliberately recorded their punishments on stone reliefs. Enemies were executed in public spaces so that entire cities would witness the cost of resistance. These punishments were not hidden, they were displayed. The goal was not just death, but submission through terror. The Assyrian kings believed mercy invited rebellion, while fear ensured obedience. In ancient Persia, punishment took a more symbolic form. Traitors were sometimes stripped of titles, erased from records, and publicly humiliated before execution. To be erased from history was considered worse than death itself. Persian kings understood that legacy mattered deeply in royal cultures. Destroying a person's honor destroyed their influence long after they were gone. This method allowed the king to punish not only the body, but the memory. Ancient Rome perfected punishment as theater. Emperors used executions, exile, and forced labor to crush political enemies. Exile was especially feared. To be banished from Rome meant losing identity, protection, and status. Many exiles died forgotten in distant lands. For Roman elites, this was a living death. Emperors preferred exile when they wanted enemies to suffer slowly, stripped of relevance rather than instantly destroyed. In medieval Europe, punishment became entwined with religion. Kings ruled under the claim of divine right, and punishment was framed as God's judgment carried out by the crown. Public executions were staged in city squares, attended by crowds. Traitors were punished in ways designed to reflect their crime. A rebel lord might lose his lands before his life, symbolizing the removal of power before death. This was deliberate symbolism. The king's authority was shown to be absolute, reaching beyond life itself. One of the most infamous forms of royal punishment was imprisonment without trial. Castles were not just symbols of power, they were prisons. Enemies were locked away in towers, dungeons, or remote fortresses, sometimes for decades. Kings favored imprisonment when execution might provoke sympathy or rebellion. A forgotten prisoner could not become a martyr. Over time, imprisonment became a silent weapon, erasing threats without public backlash. In China, imperial punishment followed strict legal codes, but emperors often bent or ignored them when power was at stake. Punishments could extend beyond the individual to their entire family. Known as collective punishment, this method ensured loyalty through fear of shared consequences. Officials knew that betrayal could doom not just themselves, but their parents, children, and relatives. This created an environment where obedience was reinforced by familial survival. In Japan's feudal era, samurai culture emphasized honor, yet kings and shoguns used punishment ruthlessly to maintain control. Disloyal lords were stripped of lands, titles, and followers. Their families were often disgraced or relocated. Loss of status was a fate many considered worse than death itself. By destroying honor, rulers dismantled the social foundation of rebellion. In the Ottoman Empire, punishment was used strategically rather than emotionally. Sultans faced constant threats from rivals, especially within their own families. To prevent civil war, Ottoman rulers institutionalized fratricide. Brothers of a new sultan were often executed to eliminate future challengers. While brutal, this policy was justified as a way to prevent greater bloodshed. It reveals how kings sometimes viewed cruelty as a form of stability. In medieval Europe, punishment was deeply tied to public loyalty. Treason was considered the ultimate crime. Kings punished traitors harshly to reinforce the idea that loyalty to the crown was sacred. Lands were confiscated, titles revoked, and families left destitute. The punishment extended beyond the individual, ensuring that rebellion carried lasting consequences. In India, kings often used exile and public humiliation rather than execution. Rivals were paraded, stripped of royal symbols, and sent away from power centers. This method preserved life while destroying legitimacy. A living rival without honor posed less threat than a dead one, whose story could inspire resistance. In Mesoamerican civilizations, punishment was often ritualized. Kings punished enemies through ceremonies that reinforced religious authority. Defeated rivals were sometimes sacrificed in public rituals meant to appease gods and legitimize the ruler's power. These acts were deeply symbolic, tying political dominance to divine favor. African kingdoms also employed punishment as political theater. In some empires, defeated enemies were forced to publicly submit, swear loyalty, or live under constant surveillance. Execution was reserved for those who refused submission. Kings preferred obedience over death, as living enemies could serve as reminders of royal dominance. In the Byzantine Empire, punishment was refined into political precision. Rather than killing rivals, emperors often blinded or mutilated them. A physically impaired rival could not rule under Byzantine law. This method removed threats while avoiding martyrdom. It was a cold, calculated approach that prioritized stability over mercy. Punishment also evolved as kings learned from history. Over time, rulers realized that excessive brutality could backfire. Executions could inspire revolts. Martyrs could unite opposition. As a result, many kings adopted subtler punishments. Surveillance, house arrest, political marriages, and forced loyalty oaths became tools of control. Yet, even as methods changed, the purpose remained the same. Punishment was about preserving authority. Kings punished not because they were cruel by nature, but because they believed fear was necessary for survival. In unstable societies, mercy was often seen as weakness. What makes these punishments especially chilling is how normalized they became. Entire societies accepted them as part of order. Children grew up watching public punishments. Nobles planned their lives around avoiding royal displeasure. Fear shaped politics, culture, and personal behavior. History shows us that kings who relied heavily on brutal punishment often ruled unstable kingdoms. Fear creates obedience, but not loyalty. Over time, resentment builds. When fear weakens, rebellion follows. Many dynasties collapse not because of their cruelty, but because of it. Yet, there were kings who balanced punishment with reform. These rulers understood that fear alone could not sustain power forever. They used punishment selectively, targeting major threats while offering stability and prosperity to the majority. These kingdoms tended to last longer, suggesting that even in absolute rule, restraint mattered. The legacy of royal punishment remains visible today. Modern legal systems evolved in reaction to the excesses of monarchs. Concepts like due process, human rights, and legal equality emerged from centuries of unchecked royal power. The brutality of the past shaped the laws of the present. When we look back at these punishments, it's easy to judge them by modern standards. But to truly understand history, we must see them through the lens of survival. Kings ruled in a world where power was fragile, enemies were constant, and mercy could mean death. Their punishments were not random cruelty, but tools forged in an age of relentless competition. Still, history does not excuse brutality, it records it. And in doing so, it offers a warning. Power maintained through fear eventually consumes itself. Kingdoms built on terror might rise quickly, but they rarely endure. The harshest punishments in history were not just about pain or death, they were about control, memory, and message. Every punishment told a story. Obey or suffer, submit or be erased, rule or be erased. And in the end, those stories outlived the kings who ordered them. Their empires fell, their crowns vanished, but the record of their cruelty remains, not as glorification, but as a reminder of what happens when power is enforced without restraint. Because history shows us this truth again and again. The harshest punishments might silence enemies for a time, but they never silence history itself.